Models can take into account only the kind of information that applies when history is a good guide to the present or the future. When things are different, like a major party candidate dropping out or assassination attempts and so on, models start to have certain weaknesses with regard to their forecasting capacity. So markets take into account novel sources of information. Anything that any trader considers relevant starts to get incorporated into the market price. There's no reason why models and markets should generally give you the same forecast. If you make apple pie with two totally different recipes with different ingredients, it would be astonishing if they tasted the same.
Let's talk about the election,
Yeah,
Rajiv.
yeah.
Everybody is on pins and needles now as the time winds down. We're a week and a couple of days away from D-Day.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about the lay of the land?
So, Glenn, I've been getting calls from journalists, several a week, and they're interested in this gap that has opened up between prediction markets and statistical models. So you have got basically two approaches to probabilistic forecasting of the election. You have statistical models like Nate Silver on Silver Bulletin, 538, The Economist has a model, and so on. Those are the three that I've been following closely. And then you've got prediction markets, Kalshi and Polymarket, which is crypto-based, and Predicted, which has been around for a while, which is much more restrictive in its rules of use. And the markets are generally giving assigning a higher probability to a Trump victory than the models. So the models have it, basically they've converged to about 53 to 55% chance of a Trump victory. They see it as being a very close election. Markets are at about 60 to 65, maybe 10 points higher or 8 to 10 points higher in probability. And people are interested in the possibility.
I did not know that. That's astounding.
Is it though? Is it? I mean,
okay.
Because there are models and markets, the approach to forecasting is completely different. They're completely different forecasting mechanisms.
Let me just say why I think it's astounding.
Why?
Because of arbitrage. Because if I have a model and I believe it, and it has a prediction that's different from the pricing that's going on in the prediction markets, I think I see a profit opportunity.
Yeah. In fact, let me get to this point a bit. In fact, that approach, the arbitrage reasoning allows us a way of actually testing which is a better forecasting mechanism. So
forgive my interruption.
No. That's a very important point, which I hope we can get back to. Yeah. Now, arbitrage across markets brings markets into line with each other. So, if I can bet against Trump for, bet against Trump for, let's say, 40 cents for a contract that'll pay me $1 if he loses on one market, and I can bet against Harris for 55 on another market, I can buy $1 for 95 cents, right? That's pure arbitrage. I mean, I can make a risk-free profit, and I'd want to scale that up and buy millions and millions of contracts. So markets will get close to each other. Models don't have to. Models can disagree with each other because they can have different ways of weighting opinion polls versus fundamental data, economic conditions, and so on. But markets, they take into account all kinds of different information. So let me give you an example that directly addresses your point about arbitrage. On July 18th, which was 3 days before Biden dropped out of the race, all of the models were assigning zero probability to anyone other than Biden or Trump winning the presidency. So they had some models at 75% Trump, 25% Biden, and so on, but zero probability for anyone other than those two. Why? Because the models, the ingredients were opinion polls that were testing that particular race. And so they plugged them into their model. Models are based on the assumption that history is a good guide to the present and the future. They're calibrated based on historical data. And that was the only data available. So the models kept publishing until July 21, and they have zero probability for anyone winning the election, aside from Trump or Biden. Meanwhile, markets had Biden at 5% for winning the election. This is on July 18. And Harris at about 23%. Now, which one, where's the opportunity for arbitrage? Well, there isn't one because nobody believed the model. Nobody believed that Harris has a 0% chance of election. Otherwise, you could bet against both Trump and Harris. So models can take into account only the kind of information that applies when history is a good guide to the present or the future. When things are different, like a major party candidate dropping out or assassination attempts and so on, models start to have certain weaknesses with regard to their forecasting capacity. So markets take into account novel sources of information. Anything that any trader considers relevant starts to get incorporated into the market price. And there's no reason why models and markets should generally give you the same forecast. If you make apple pie with two totally different recipes with different ingredients, it would be astonishing if they tasted the same. That's.
Let me see if I'm following.
Yeah.
Models require to be specified.
Yeah.
That is, you have to commit to a particular representation of what the causal process is.
Exactly.
The outcome of which you're attempting to estimate. Markets don't require you to tie yourself down, or don't require those who are trading on them to be tied down to any particular vision. They give a summary report about the cumulative weight of the judgments that traders will have come to,
exactly,
one way or the other, however they will have come to it. And we don't have to know what's going on in the trader's head.
Exactly.
Models tie our hands. They force us to look through a particular frame.
Exactly.
And that frame could be wrong.
That frame could be right under normal conditions and wrong under the present circumstances. So yes, models could be very useful in some situations and not so much in others. To take another example for COVID prevalence, let's say, cases and hospitalizations and deaths, a model would be essentially epidemiological, right? They would look at infection, how a disease progresses. They look at the infection fatality rate and so on and so forth. Whereas a markets did not exist for this, but if a market could potentially react to a statement by Ron DeSantis to open the beaches, or a reaction by a school board to open the schools and so on, which you wouldn't, which just would be missing data from the model. So models are different from markets, and we've talked about the strength of markets in taking on board information that models exclude. But markets also have weaknesses. Markets can have, you'll be familiar with Alan Greenspan's term, irrational exuberance. They could have excess volatility. They could respond to rumors. They could be dominated by a small set of traders who have very particular views. There are even incentives for manipulation of markets. And this is some of my work with David Rothschild on the 2012 election found fairly strong evidence that somebody was trying to trade in a way that put a floor on the price of the Romney contract, so that beliefs about his viability would not drop too far. Because, elections are not like solar eclipses or Category 5 hurricanes. For eclipses or hurricanes, it doesn't matter what you believe about what's going to happen. It's just going to happen. Your beliefs are not going to affect the outcome. Elections are different. If a candidate starts to lose momentum, lose viability, you can have morale collapse among supporters. You can have volunteer effort dry up, and you can have donors walk away. And that can change the objective probability. So there are incentives actually in place to manipulate markets, to try to make your candidate look stronger than they actually are. And that might actually make them somewhat stronger. So markets are not perfect either. And the question about which is a more accurate forecasting mechanism on average is an empirical question. You can't reason yourself to an answer to that question.
Have you looked into the guts of the models? Do you know how they work?
I have to some degree. As they get closer and closer to the election, they rely almost exclusively on opinion polls. Far away from the election, they look at more fundamental data such as unemployment rates, the stock market, and so on. But at this point, they're basically reflecting opinion polls, and which is why they have basically converged. You've got hardly any difference between the three main models that I've been looking at. Now there are others that disagree, but the models have essentially converged to each other. So I do know,
giving a 53 to 55% chance to Trump prevailing over Harris in the election.
Correct. That is correct. And then they have predictions for every state, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina. So, and it's built up from that,
it would have to be given the Electoral College.
Exactly right. Of course, there are models, the models will predict who's going to win the popular vote. They give a probability to that as well, and so on. And various events like somebody sweeping all the 7 states. By the way, I think there's so much uncertainty in this election. I wouldn't be surprised if any one of the two candidates swept all 7. It's just very uncertain. But I'm not a forecaster. I just evaluate forecasting mechanisms.
But the traders' collective vision places Trump's chance of winning much higher in 53 to 55%.
Yeah, at the moment, across the three markets that I'm looking at, 60 to 65. And I want to say that it's not surprising that they disagree. It wouldn't be surprising if they placed it at 40 to 45. They're completely different forecasting mechanisms based on different information. The arbitrage argument works across markets, right? Within the set of markets.
Yes.
It doesn't really work with regard to model versus market, because the traders are, they're not constrained to simply use the model forecasts. They can go with all kinds of other information that they believe is relevant this cycle, may not have been relevant previously.
But I was thinking, and maybe it's wrong, if I were a modeler and I believed in my model and I saw a disparity between the price being at which contracts were being traded in a prediction market and what my model was predicting, I would expect my expected return would be positive from engaging in certain trades so this is the arbitrage point. Now I'd be taking a risk.
Yeah, you would be taking a risk. So it's not arbitrage in the classical sense of a risk-free portfolio. You would be taking a risk, but people would be happy to take a risk to take the opposite side of that bet if they thought that your model was wrong. Sometimes the market price, so for example, suppose that the market price is 62, which is what it was last I checked on Kalshi. 62 means that you can buy a contract for 62 cents. That will pay off $1 if Trump wins and nothing otherwise. And so that's the structure of the contract. It's sometimes called a binary option. Some people interpret that as saying that traders believe that there's a 62% chance of Trump victory. That's not at all. That's not at all what's going on. There are traders who believe that there's a 70 or 75 or 80% chance of victory. And there are other traders who believe there's a 40 or 50% chance of victory. And they have so why aren't the 40% buying up at selling at 62? Why aren't the 75 people, snapping up these contracts?
Yes.
It's because they've already done so. They've got millions already, in their portfolios. They've hit their risk limits or they've hit their budget constraints. So they've already bought to the point where they can't buy any more, either because they don't want to take more risk or because they just don't have any more money. So what the market is showing is, in a sense, a balance between narratives of the election. There are those who think that the market price is too high, and they would sell the contract. Those who think it's too low, and they would buy the contract. But they are sitting there in balance because nobody wants to take now more positions in the absence of new information. When new information arrives, they'll change their mind. So that's my interpretation of the market price. It's a sort of a delicate balance between those who disagree one way and those who disagree the other, having hit their risk limits and budget constraints.